The galaxy had known a fragile peace, built on ancient accords and the unchallenged dominance of a few powerful coalitions. Chief among them was the Galactic Coalition, a sprawling empire of species bound by treaties and a shared, often condescending, view of those they deemed lesser. Humanity, relative newcomers to the cosmic stage, were one such species. They were seen as chaotic, emotional, prone to infighting, yet occasionally useful for manual labor or niche technologies the coalition didn't care to develop itself. They were tolerated, regulated, and largely ignored. Their pleas for fair trade, for recognition of their territorial rights beyond the established zones, were met with polite dismissals or outright laughter in the gilded halls of coalition power. They sent ambassadors, earnest and hopeful, bearing gifts of art and philosophy. They spoke of cooperation, of shared futures, of the potential for mutual growth. The coalition saw only weakness in their open hands, naivete in their words. They saw systems rich in resources, strategic locations ripe for expansion. They saw a species too fractured, too disorganized, too soft to defend what they possessed. The warnings humanity offered, of their history, of their capacity for both creation and destruction, of lessons learned in blood on their own small world, were filed away as quaint barbarisms, irrelevant in the enlightened age of galactic governance. Then came the catalyst. It was not a declaration of war, not a formal conflict with rules and negotiations. It was a brutal, clinical act of extermination. A key human colony, prosperous and vibrant, sat on a nexus of jump points deemed vital for coalition expansion. Negotiations failed, or rather, they were never truly considered. The order was given. A fleet arrived, silent and overwhelming, not to conquer, but to cleanse. Cities were reduced to ash, oceans boiled, the population vaporized or systematically hunted down. It was a demonstration, a lesson for any who might dare to resist coalition will. It was thorough. It was absolute. They thought they had erased it all. Erased the colony, erased the resistance, perhaps even erased the spirit of a species. They were efficient in their cruelty. But they missed one. A single small freighter, disabled but not destroyed by the initial bombardment, drifted in the void, its recording system still active, capturing the horror in chilling detail. A sole survivor, a young cadet, watched her home world die, listened to the cold-blooded orders, felt the void tear open in her soul where her family had been. The freighter, a relic of older, sturdier design, somehow survived, a ghost ship carrying a payload of absolute truth and righteous fury back to the core systems of humanity. It arrived years later, a derelict found floating in a forgotten sector, its data core intact. The arrival of the freighter was not met with media fanfare or political rallies. It was met with a silence that spread like a plague. The raw, unedited data was disseminated not through public channels, but through secure military networks, through encrypted civilian bands, reaching every corner of human space, every ship, every colony. The images, the sounds, the cold indifference of the coalition officers ordering the deaths of billions, were burned into the collective consciousness. There was no panic. Not initially. Only a profound, aching grief that settled deep in the bone. Then came the rage. It wasn't a loud, chaotic anger the coalition expected from the emotional humans. It was cold. It was focused. It was absolute. Borders between human nations dissolved, petty political squabbles ceased to exist. Corporations pooled their resources, scientific academies shared every secret, military branches integrated seamlessly. The shared trauma, the shared injustice, forged them into a single, unyielding entity. The vow was unspoken but understood by all, never again. Never would they be weak. Never would they be victims. Humanity withdrew. To the galaxy, it seemed they had collapsed, fractured under the weight of the atrocity. Trade routes dwindled, diplomatic ties frayed and broke. Human space became a dark zone, a blank spot on the galactic map. The coalition patrols cautiously probed the edges, found only silence and automated defenses, and reported back that the human threat, such as it was, had neutralized itself. They were relieved, complacent. They had no idea. This silence was not collapse. It was gestation. For decades, the human core systems became a forge. Their scientists, driven by a desperate ingenuity born of trauma and a burning need for power, delved into forbidden fields. They unlocked the secrets of the void itself, manipulating exotic matter, bending spacetime, weaponizing quantum phenomena. Shipyards hidden in deep nebulae and asteroid belts churned out vessels unlike any the galaxy had ever conceived, dark, angular, built for a single purpose, overwhelming superiority. Their society became a machine, efficient and relentless, every resource, every mind, every life dedicated to the singular goal, ensuring survival through absolute, undeniable power. The cadet from the freighter, now an admiral with eyes that held the cold vastness of space and the burning embers of a dead world, oversaw the final preparations. Her name was Elara. Then, they returned. There were no grand pronouncements, no diplomatic communiques warning of their arrival. The first sign was the sudden, inexplicable disappearance of a coalition battlegroup patrolling a sector far from human space, a sector that had once been a staging ground for the Catalyst fleet. Sensors registered nothing. One moment the battlegroup was there, a proud display of coalition might, the next, it was gone. Not destroyed, not crippled, simply gone. As if reality had been unzipped and they had fallen through the seam. The second sign was more dramatic. The primary shipyard of the Coalition's Third Fleet, a massive orbital complex known as the Anvil, simply ceased to exist. From light years away, observers saw a brief, blinding flare of energy, not an explosion, but something far stranger, something that seemed to invert space itself around the station. When the light subsided, the Anvil, and everything within 1,000,000 kilometers, was gone. Swept away into somewhere else. The strike was surgical, silent, and utterly devastating. It was precise. It was cold. It was human. Panic rippled through the coalition. Their arrogance shattered like cheap glass. The species they had dismissed, the primitives they had massacred, were back, and they wielded power that defied all known physics. Initial disbelief gave way to terror. They sent probes, heavily armed scout ships, then destroyer squadrons into the dark zone that had been human space. None returned. Reports from the edge spoke of impossible speeds, weapons that didn't fire beams or missiles but simply unmade targets atom by atom, shields that absorbed energy like a void. The ships themselves were terrifying. Not the sleek, colorful vessels of the Coalition, but black, obsidian behemoths, silent and angular, moving with unnatural speed and agility. They didn't broadcast identification codes or respond to hails. They simply appeared where they were least expected, delivered unimaginable destruction, and vanished, leaving behind only wreckage and the profound, unsettling silence of the void. Leading them, intelligence fragments whispered, was a ship known only as the Retribution, commanded by an admiral whose face was never shown, only her eyes, seen on rare intercepted transmissions, cold and ancient with suffering. Elara's eyes. The campaign of Retribution was not a conventional war. It was a systematic, calculated dismantling of the Coalition. Sector by sector, fleet by fleet, key strategic assets were targeted with chilling efficiency. Communication relays vanished, crippling command and control. Supply depots were erased, starving fleets of fuel and ordnance. Shipyards like the Anvil were unmade, halting production. It was less a military conquest and more a plague of non-existence spreading through the Coalition's infrastructure. Psychological warfare was a key component. On systems targeted for neutralization, before the final blow, chillingly clear broadcasts would override all frequencies. They weren't threats. They were historical records. Recordings of the catalyst. The screams of the dying, the callous laughter of Coalition officers, the cold-blooded orders. These weren't ancient archives dug up, these were newly synthesized, crystal-clear audiovisuals, accompanied by stark text listing the names of the coalition leaders responsible, the unit designations, the specific orders given. Remember, the silent ship seemed to broadcast through these transmissions, remember what you did. Remember who paid the price. Coalition fleets were sent to engage, to destroy these terrifying human ships. They were met with tactics that rewrote the rules of engagement. Human vessels moved through pocket dimensions, appeared behind enemy lines, utilized phased reality projectors to make their ships appear elsewhere, drawing fire while the true fleet struck from an unseen angle. Weapons designed to pierce energy shields found themselves ineffective against hulls that seemed to absorb or deflect energy in unknown ways. Missile barrages were simply winked out of existence by localized spacetime distortion fields. Every coalition strategy, every established doctrine, proved useless against this new, terrifying enemy. It became clear, quickly, that humanity was not fighting with everything it had. The overwhelming power displayed felt measured, controlled. There were whispers of Phase 2 technologies, of weapons held in reserve capable of rending the fabric of spacetime on a galactic scale. The quiet efficiency of the destruction, the almost bored precision with which entire fleets were unmade, suggested a deeper well of power that the galaxy was only seeing the surface of. They did not need to use their full might, the threat of it, the sheer unknown quantity of it, was enough to sow absolute terror. Every vanishing fleet, every erased station, was a reminder, they could do worse. Much worse. The coalition, vast and seemingly unassailable, began to crumble. Fear spread faster than any human ship. Member species questioned their alliances. Bureaucrats fled their posts. Admirals issued contradictory orders or simply vanished, presumably attempting to escape the inevitable. Faith in the High Council evaporated. Secession movements, long suppressed, exploded across dozens of systems. Planets refused to pay taxes, fleets refused to deploy against the human specter, the monolithic empire fractured into 1,000 fearful pieces. In desperation, the High Council authorized the activation of ancient protocols, forbidden superweapons and summoning rituals based on technologies and entities barely understood, relics of a forgotten cosmic war. They unleashed energy-consuming void entities, activated planet-cracking sonic emitters, attempted to awaken slumbering mechanical gods. Against the humans, these measures were futile. The void entities were simply folded into pocket dimensions or somehow absorbed by the human ships. The sonic emitters' frequencies were precisely countered, their destructive waves turning harmless. The mechanical gods remained unresponsive, or worse, turned their silent, terrifying gaze upon the coalition who dared disturb their rest. Their desperation only highlighted their impotence. The retribution, accompanied by a silent, ominous fleet, appeared not at the coalition military headquarters, but above the capital world itself. Orbiting the jewel of the coalition, a planet of unparalleled beauty and history, the human fleet sat silent. They did not fire. They did not demand surrender. They simply existed, a black scar against the blue-green world, a physical manifestation of the reckoning. The planet below descended into chaos. Leaders pleaded, systems broadcast desperate offers of peace, tribute, anything. On the bridge of the retribution, Elara watched the panicked broadcasts. Her officers, veterans of the silent war, stood vigil, their faces grim, their eyes hard. The ultimate weapon, the one capable of unraveling the planet's core, was armed and ready. It would be so easy. So final. The vengeance, delivered in full. But the silence stretched on. The lesson had been taught through destruction. Now it would be cemented through restraint, a demonstration of power far more chilling than annihilation. They could destroy it all, but they chose not to. Not out of mercy, but because the continued existence of the coalition's heart world, under the perpetual shadow of human power, was a far more potent symbol. A constant, living reminder of who now held the reins. The galaxy watched, breath held. The old order had fallen, not with a bang, but a whimper, dismantled piece by a force it had carelessly discarded. The humans, the chaotic, emotional primitives, were now the undisputed masters of the cosmic stage. The fear they inspired was palpable, a new force of gravity in the galactic balance of power. The High Council effectively ceased to function, its members scattered or captured. The coalition military dissolved, its surviving ships either surrendering to the humans, fleeing into the void, or being absorbed by newly independent systems. Humanity did not establish a new empire in the traditional sense. They did not occupy worlds or demand tithes. Their presence was felt not through garrisons, but through silence and the sheer, overwhelming power they could project instantly, anywhere. They enforced their will not through bureaucracy, but through the quiet understanding that disobedience meant erasure. The core human systems remained largely closed off, a heart of unimaginable power beating in the darkness. Other species, long oppressed by the coalition, looked upon humanity with a mix of awe, hope, and profound fear. Uprisings against former coalition client states flared, often using the human example as justification, though humanity itself rarely intervened directly unless their interests were threatened. But within the core human worlds, the cost of victory, the weight of the power wielded, began to take its toll. The unified front forged in trauma began to show hairline fractures. Was this silence, this rule through fear, the future they wanted? Had they become the very thing they fought? Discussions, heated and often painful, took place in council chambers and mess halls. Some argued for further expansion, for imposing a just order on the galaxy through force. Others argued for strict isolation, wanting nothing more to do with the species that had caused them such pain. A vocal minority, hardened by the long war and steeped in the cold logic of absolute power, believed the campaign of erasure should have been absolute, that leaving remnants of the coalition, even the capital world, was a weakness. They saw mercy as a betrayal of the dead. Admiral Alara, the architect of the retribution, listened, her expression unreadable. The internal conflict was perhaps the most dangerous challenge they now faced. New threats, or rather, new challenges, began to emerge. Remnants of the coalition, bitter and vengeful, plotted in the shadows. Opportunistic species sought to exploit the power vacuum, testing the boundaries of the new, silent human dominance. And the internal divisions within humanity itself held the potential for self-destruction. The galaxy was not at peace, it was merely holding its breath, waiting to see what this new, terrifying power would do next. The new galactic order was fragile, built on the foundations of shattered arrogance and the chilling certainty of human power. Humanity had retreated back into its silent core systems, but their influence was everywhere, a pervasive atmosphere of caution and fear. No longer underestimated, they were now the cosmic apex predator, feared by all. Their burden was the immense power they possessed and the moral questions that came with its use. They were the guardians of never again, a vow paid for in blood and decades of silent, terrifying development. A final message, carved into the surface of a dead moon orbiting the former coalition capital world, served as a stark, silent warning to the galaxy. It was not written in any single language, but projected as pure concept directly into the minds of any who approached. We did not forget. We will not forget. It was their final statement, a reminder of the price of cruelty and the enduring power of memory and resolve. The war was over. But the galaxy knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was not the end. It was merely the end of one story, and the beginning of a new, far more uncertain one, under the silent gaze of a humanity that had learned the terrible price of being weak, and the even more terrible burden of becoming strong. The human fleet remained, silent sentinels in the void. Their ships, dark and angular, were less vessels of exploration or commerce and more monuments to suffering and vengeance. They were symbols of a promise kept, a debt repaid in cosmic fire and the undoing of matter. The galaxy, which had once dismissed them, now walked on eggshells around the edges of human space, praying they remained silent, praying they remained contained. Generations passed in the uneasy quiet. The stories of the catalyst and the retribution became legends, cautionary tales whispered in hushed tones across thousands of worlds. Human history, once fragmented and chaotic, was now defined by 2 points, the immense suffering they endured, and the terrible power they forged from it. Their cultural output shifted, becoming more introspective, more focused on the duality of creation and destruction, the fine line between justice and vengeance. There was a weariness to their art, a profound sadness underlying their newfound strength. Admiral Alara remained a figure of reverence and fear, her actions during the war debated and analyzed for centuries. Some saw her as a savior, the one who ensured the survival of the species. Others saw her as a necessary evil, a reflection of the darkness humanity had to embrace. She rarely spoke publicly after the war, retreating to a quiet life on a rebuilt world, carrying the weight of billions lost and billions avenged. Her eyes, forever captured in archived images, remained the symbol of a species fundamentally changed. The structures humanity had built during their silent transformation were not just ships and weapons. They had also constructed vast, decentralized information networks, secure and pervasive, capable of monitoring galactic communications with unsettling ease. They knew everything that was happening, every whisper of dissent, every potential threat. This omnipresence, invisible yet always felt, was another layer of their dominance. The galaxy wasn't just afraid of their ships, it was afraid of their knowledge, their awareness. There were those among the alien species who tried to understand humanity, to bridge the gap forged in fire and suffering. Some sought alliances, cautiously approaching the edges of human space with tentative overtures. A few brave individuals, scholars or diplomats, attempted to learn human languages, study their history. They found a people deeply scarred, their outward stoicism often masking a raw, exposed nerve of past pain. Trust was not easily earned, if it could be earned at all. The default human stance was one of cold vigilance. The internal debate within humanity never truly ceased. The faction advocating for greater control, for imposing their will more directly on the galaxy, for its own good, grew louder in certain sectors. They argued that restraint was weakness, that true security lay only in absolute subjugation of potential threats. They pointed to the history of the coalition, arguing that only unchallenged power could prevent such atrocities from happening again. This faction saw the galaxy not as neighbors, but as potential aggressors who had simply learned to be quiet out of fear. Opposing them were those who remembered the cost, who saw the danger of becoming the very monsters they had fought. They argued for focusing inward, on rebuilding their own society, on ensuring the immense power they held did not corrupt them from within. They spoke of responsibility, of the moral burden that came with their strength. Admiral Alara, in one of her rare public statements late in life, supported this view, warning against the seductive nature of absolute power and the ease with which victims could become oppressors. The military, forged into the most efficient and terrifying fighting force the galaxy had ever seen, largely remained loyal to the cautious vigilance advocated by Alara and her successors. Their mandate was clear: protect humanity, ensure never again remained a reality, and eliminate any threat with extreme prejudice, but avoid unnecessary conflict or conquest. They were the shield and the sword, tempered in suffering, wielded with grim purpose. The advanced technologies humanity had developed remained guarded secrets. While some lesser technologies filtered out through cautious trade or reverse-engineered wreckage, the truly devastating capabilities, the space-time distortion, the reality-bending weapons, the instantaneous fleet deployment, were never replicated by other species. Humanity held the keys to power that the rest of the galaxy could only theorize about, ensuring their technical dominance remained absolute. There were stories, whispers in the void, of human scout ships appearing far beyond their recognized territory, silent and unseen, observing galactic events with an inscrutable purpose. Were they gathering intelligence for future strikes? Were they simply monitoring the peace they had imposed? Or were they searching for something else entirely? The silence of their presence was often more unsettling than any overt act of aggression. Decades turned into a century. The Galactic Coalition was a historical footnote, its member species reorganizing into smaller, more cautious blocks. The memory of the catalyst faded for some, becoming abstract history. But for humanity, the memory remained visceral, a constant, burning ember in their collective soul. It was the foundation of their identity, the justification for their power, the source of their perpetual vigilance. The galaxy lived under the shadow of human power, a shadow they had cast themselves through their arrogance and cruelty. They had wanted to teach humanity a lesson, instead, humanity had taught the galaxy one. The lesson was brutal, final, and unforgettable: underestimate the seemingly weak at your peril, for the fires of suffering can forge strength the complacent can never comprehend. The future remained uncertain. Would humanity maintain its stoic, fearful peace? Would the internal debates lead to a new, aggressive expansion? Would a new power rise to challenge them, restarting the cycle of violence? These questions lingered, unanswered, in the silent, vast darkness of the galaxy. Humanity, the silent power, simply watched, waited, and remembered. Their ships continued their silent patrols, dark shapes against the starlight, reminders of the price paid and the power gained. They were the legacy of a dead colony, the manifestation of a vow, the ultimate consequence of underestimation. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Now it had to live with the teacher. The great trade routes, once bustling arteries of the coalition, were now quiet, cautious tendrils avoiding the known proximity of human space. Information flowed differently, filtered through apprehension. Diplomatic exchanges were tentative, filled with veiled references and careful phrasing, always mindful of the silent ears that might be listening from the dark. For the younger generations of other species, humanity was a boogeyman, a distant, terrifying force that had crushed empires. For the older generations, those who remembered the coalition's dominance and the sudden, brutal shift, humanity was a complex enigma, both terrifying avengers and the architects of a grim new stability. The technology humanity had developed was not merely destructive. It was fundamentally different. They had learned to manipulate the very fabric of reality, to fold space, to step between moments. Their ships didn't travel through space, they transcended it. This capability, hinted at in their devastating attacks, was the source of the deepest fear and awe. It was power on a cosmic scale, divorced from conventional physics. The internal conflict within humanity, while present, was also muted by the lingering trauma and the pervasive sense of responsibility. The vast majority understood that the power they held was a burden, one that required constant vigilance and careful control. The extreme factions remained on the fringes, their calls for further aggression or absolute isolation largely tempered by the collective memory of what they had endured and what they had become. There was a certain irony recognized by few: the species deemed chaotic and emotional had become the most disciplined, the most coldly logical force in the galaxy. Their emotions had not been erased, but refined, honed into a cutting edge of focused resolve and enduring sorrow. The grief was a wellspring of strength, the rage a constant fuel for their vigilance. The silent sentinels of the human fleet were more than just warships. They were mobile fortresses, self-sufficient colonies in miniature, capable of operating independently for decades. Their crews were highly trained, their discipline absolute. They were not conquerors seeking territory, they were guardians, forever on watch. Occasionally, human ships would appear in systems not explicitly claimed or controlled by humanity, but under threat from pirates or minor warlords that had sprung up in the wake of the coalition's collapse. They would deal with the threat with brutal, swift efficiency, then vanish as quickly as they arrived, leaving behind only wreckage and a chilling reminder of the power that lurked in the dark. These acts were not altruistic, they were strategic. They maintained a degree of order that prevented the rise of new, unpredictable threats on their borders. The memory of the catalyst, preserved in perfect detail within humanity's vast data networks, was mandatory viewing for every human citizen upon reaching adulthood. It was not a relic of the past, it was a living lesson, a constant reinforcement of the vow and the cost. It ensured that the generations born after the war never forgot why their society was structured the way it was, why their vigilance was absolute. The Admiral Alara, before her passing, left a single, final message recorded for the future. It was not a strategic directive or a philosophical treatise. It was a simple recounting of the day the freighter returned, of seeing the raw footage, of the silence that fell over her command center. Her voice, old and weary, described the cold void that opened within her, the place where hope had been. The message ended with a single sentence: the price of forgetting is paid in blood. The galaxy, reshaped by human suffering and human power, existed in a state of suspended animation. It was a landscape of ruins and wary survivors, forever conscious of the dark silence that held it in check. The era of arrogant empires had ended, replaced by the era of quiet fear and the long, heavy shadow of humanity. They had been underestimated. They had been broken. They had returned. And the galaxy would never be the same. The remnants of the coalition capital world, spared from annihilation, became a strange, morbid tourist attraction for some, a site of pilgrimage for others who sought to understand the scale of the fall. The human carving on the moon remained, a constant, silent accusation hanging in the void. It was a tombstone for an empire, erected by those it had sought to erase. Historians of other species debated the motivations of humanity. Was it pure vengeance? Justice? Survival? Or something else entirely, something alien and terrifying forged in the crucible of their pain? There were no easy answers. Humanity offered no explanations, no justifications. Their actions spoke for themselves, cold, precise, and absolute. The vast human defense network, layered and complex, went far beyond conventional fleets and weapons. It involved manipulation of reality itself, early warning systems woven into the fabric of spacetime, countermeasures that could nullify threats before they even fully materialized. Their core systems were impregnable, not by force, but by making them fundamentally inaccessible through normal means. Whispers persisted of projects undertaken during the silent decades, projects that pushed the boundaries of science and ethics. Rumors of sentient weapons, of consciousness uploaded into war machines, of genetic modifications that enhanced human capabilities far beyond their original limits. These were stories without proof, yet they added to the chilling mystique surrounding humanity, suggesting a willingness to embrace any means necessary to ensure their survival. The galaxy had assumed its own sophistication was the peak, that its understanding of physics and strategy was complete. Humanity had proven them devastatingly wrong. They had taken the very concepts the coalition considered theoretical or forbidden and made them terrifyingly real. They had weaponized grief, focused rage into scientific breakthroughs, and built an unstoppable force on the graves of their dead. The future was a blank canvas, painted black by the shadow of humanity. There was no clear path forward, no grand alliance to challenge their dominance. There was only the present, a state of cautious non-aggression enforced by the lingering memory of fire and the silent threat of power beyond comprehension. The war for vengeance was won, but the war for the soul of humanity, and the future of the galaxy, had just begun. The legacy of the Catalyst was not just the destruction of a colony, it was the creation of a force that reshaped the stars. The coalition's arrogance had birthed its own destroyer. Humanity had learned the hard way that peace built on contempt was no peace at all. Now, they enforced a silence built on fear, a fragile stability in a universe that had shown them no mercy. They did not forget. And they would ensure the galaxy remembered.